Hi, folks, with Tacitus today, your pushback channel, and thank you for joining this audio radio live stream. This, excuse me, in this essay, I'd like to talk about a recent survey in the US where they polled, I think it was a telephone poll, they polled likely voters and asked a series of questions about did people vote twice? Did people engage in illegal voting? Did they fill out electoral ballots? Did they fill out ballots for family members without telling those family members, and so on? Now, if we look at the amount of illegal votes cast, or based on the survey, if we look at the amount of illegal votes cast and the amount of one person doing multiple votes, were either illegal or fraudulent. Now, it may have been slightly more, but just assuming for the moment it is. Now, we also it was astonishing that 99.8% or something of those votes were all for Biden. So you've got high levels, in terms of historical levels, at least. This is all in the mail-in ballot side of it, by the way. That in the mail-in ballots, that there's a huge increase in, or what's alleged here, and what I think is pretty obvious, was fraudulent and illegal voter activity. And these votes, nearly all the fraudulent votes, were cast in favour of one candidate and not another, suggesting it was very much pre-organised and pre-arranged and orchestrated. So now, if let's say it's in round numbers, it's 20 million votes, that would give Biden, say, 61, 62 million votes. Now, if we plot in terms of total votes cast, if we plot the performance of a particularly weak candidate, say John McCain against Obama and that sort of thing, and if we plot the fairly weak candidate against the relatively popular candidate, then there's a certain sort of maximum threshold that the weaker candidates achieved. So if Biden came in at around 61 million votes, he would plot exactly on that curve. And remember, we're talking about a guy who can barely string a sentence together and who didn't campaign and who had such a low key media exposure, other than the globalist media sort of constantly trying to put a positive face on Biden. But if you look at the campaigning, the guy we didn't do any campaigning. You look at that sort of stuff, and his very weak performance in all areas of certainly getting out there amongst the public and addressing and dealing with the public. Trump, by contrast, went the length and breadth of the nation doing these mass rallies and so on. So he very, very clearly was the better campaigner and by far and away the more popular candidate. So if he got 73 million votes and Biden got 61 million, that would be about the ratio that you'd expect historically from presidential elections. So really 20 million votes were conjured out of thin air. All of them were given to Biden to ensure that he won. So that's my opinion, at least. Now, pretty much every way you slice it and dice it, and no matter how you look at it, from any direction that you look at it in, and the subject of the election came up, and the attitude around, we're talking sort of public servant types, really, who are, in fact, I think, like I'm the only person that isn't a fucking public servant here. But anyway, this idea of Trump winning or losing, and the election outcome. Do you believe in free and fair elections? Yes, free and fair, absolutely free and fair. Will of the people. Then it was wrong to rig the election to stop. Oh no. We only support free and fair elections if the candidate we want wins. If the candidate we don't want wins, then it's an outrageous outcome, a terrible outcome. and anything that was done, illegal or otherwise, to stop Trump is acceptable. It's all acceptable. Rigging, dead people voting, double voting, triple voting, corrupt practices in mail, and it is all totally acceptable if it means stopping Trump. But Holly, you just said that you want free and fair elections. Well, yes, I do, but only if the candidate I want wins. Now, there's actually very few people, I'm one of them, that thinks that elections should be an expression of the will of the people. Now, that means I have to accept that people I don't like are going to win elections, that political parties with policies I disagree with are going to win elections. That I have to accept that price. That is part of the price of paying for free and fair and scrupulously administered in terms of probity, scrupulously administered elections. And I accept that. Same as I accept independent justice, that based on law and the facts and so on. Not that I'm always going to like the outcome, and sometimes it's going to be unfortunate, or I may not agree with it even. But that doesn't mean that we should give that up and turn it into some ideological, prearranged, orchestrated bullshit process. That's not the answer. The answer is maybe to more scrupulously observe facts and evidence, or to more scrupulously administer and police voting processes and procedures and vote counting processes and things like that. So I accept that in order for that completely impartial independence, we sometimes get outcomes we don't like. Now, for the globalists, this is absolutely anathema, that they must get the outcome they want. Otherwise, that interferes with and disrupts and delays the globalist project and the implementation of it. So they have to have their wins, and if they have to rig elections to do it or rig court cases or whatever, then they see that as an essential, and they see that as acceptable. And importantly, in the public services and others, to activists, NGOs, they think that rigging elections and so on is quite acceptable if provided you get the outcome you want. And this is again a widespread view. So a lot of the people that commit voter fraud or facilitate it or support it think that they're not really doing anything wrong. The media that cheers it on thinks they're not doing anything wrong. False claims of the most secure election ever, again, cheered on by the media and so on. And no, we're not doing anything wrong. We're helping the globalist project. So we must be right. We can't be wrong. And these attitudes pervade. So I just sort of want to have a little look at the amount of people, this is in the survey, the amount of people that voted at least twice. For example, they used to live in one state in the United States, but they've since moved to another state. And they claim that they voted twice. So they voted in the state that they now live in, but they also voted in the state that they once lived in. And now if you look at the amount of people that claim that, and then you look at the amount of votes that were cast and extrapolate the two, and they won't be exact, but it'll be representative. Just people who voted twice comes to something like 12 million. And that alone is enough to have given Trump a victory, particularly given the concentration of that duplicate voting in the swing states, which again clearly suggests that it was orchestrated and stage managed and curated. I mean, if it was, if they had sort of a massive duplicate voting in California, I mean, who cares? California's already runaway Democrat anyway, but it's the way these duplicate votes concentrated in places like Georgia and Pennsylvania, states that were hotly contested, and that the Trump team argued that they'd actually won if the election was clean and fair and above board. Now, if you go to the next thing of people who filled out forms for relatives, filled out voting ballots for relatives, and you look at that comes to about 15 million there. So now, so if you add all those up and relatives voting on behalf of dead relatives, things like that, you add all, assuming all of it was fraudulent voting, then you'd be looking at well over 20 million. So that possibility is hanging out. Now again, if the fraudulent voting or allegedly fraudulent voting was approximately 50-50 between the two candidates, then you'd go, oh well, it probably isn't making much of a difference anyway. But when it's 99% for one candidate, then you go, hold on a minute, there's this very suspicious voting here, and all of it's for one candidate, not another. Then you've got cause to go, whoa, this is something to look at. So if you were any election official, any government official, and your concern was, probity to the highest standards, and auditing to the highest standards of voting and vote counting, then no matter which party you were for, no matter who you liked or didn't like, or no matter what, if you were concerned about voting probity and electoral probity, you would examine that in great excruciating detail. But not one person, as an election official, not one election official bothered to look into this stuff, highly suspect stuff. There was one where one house, just one house, there was more than 10,000 voters registered at one house. Pretty much all of them voted for Biden. Now, again, you don't need to be a partisan election official. And if you're concerned about the electoral process, and one assumes if you're an election official, you will be concerned and are concerned about it, then you would examine that in fine detail, with scrupulous observance of the laws and the policies and processes of voting. And yet no one investigated any of those things. And if they were investigated, then the election outcome, I think, would have been very different. But I've done a lot of travel around the world, going to a lot of third world countries, banana republic type places, and the mere mention of voting and honest voting and vote counting gets uproarious laughter, raucous laughter from around the table, and they just accept that's just as much as we breathe oxygen to live, or something. They accept that corrupt voting is just how things are done. That's just the way it is, and isn't that a tragedy that there are people, many countries, by the way, that are such banana republics and so fucking corrupt, and where the people that hold power are determined to keep it by using sham elections as a supposed justification and legitimization of their power, that they just run these bullshit sham elections. And if they think they're even in the slightest chance of having their power challenged, they'll just rig the fuck out of it. And they'll just steal ballot boxes and fill them up with 100% votes for the candidate. That's standard practice in these countries. And they laugh at the idea it could be any different, or that it ever could be any different. But that's nonetheless allowed to happen. And you know what? We've allowed that to happen in the West now, where only the globalist candidates will stand for election. If there's any threat to the globalist candidate, they will just rig the fuck out of the election to make sure that their guy gets up. We've allowed that to happen, and all our government's taken over by the globalists, including our courts and all sorts of things. And we've allowed that to happen, and we're all suffering terribly because of it. You've been with Tassless today, your Pushback channel, and thank you for listening.